Hello there, I'm Sabe42, and welcome to the Career Mode tutorial. This video is sort of in between Flight 2 and Flight 3. I'll be going over some alternative rocket designs to the standard moon rocket that was introduced in the last tutorial. This should give some more options to work with and try to alleviate a really pesky problem. Okay, this is the monstrosity that I built to try to put more stuff in orbit or get more experiments and do different biomes on Minimus. It's the basic moon rocket design with an extra layer put on the outside, and I couldn't lift it with LVT-45s, so I had to use 30s, but they don't have any gimbaling. So I needed to put all kinds of goo canisters at the bottom so that it would put drag at the bottom so it would fly straight. Now the second stage actually does have the LV909 engine, so I can turn it a little bit, but this design is so hard to do. It had this problem right here that you're seeing. What the heck is that? It's this shaking phenomena. I don't know, like it's hard to tell when it's actually going to happen, but with this rocket design it happened a lot, and I couldn't make it stop. So I tried different things like cutting the engines, but once the shaking starts, it just keeps going until the dang thing explodes. So there we go, I'm exploding over and over, trying to figure out a way to get it to stop. This is not a rocket that I recommend you build, or maybe if you want to put up with this. So what I did find out was when you time accelerate, it sort of takes it out of physics. So as you can see, it's starting to shake, and then I time accelerate, and then the shaking goes away. And then it starts to shake again, and then time accelerate, it goes away. So now I'm trying something different. I'm going back into the vehicle assembly, or the tracking center, selecting the rocket again. Maybe it's going to work, and I don't even fire the engines. Look at this. And it just blows itself up. So this is the problem that we're trying to fix here. And it happens with the normal moon rocket. I wasn't able to make it happen with the moon rocket, but I did catch it there. So these are some easy alternate designs that you can do with the standard moon rocket. Now I have a hunch that the shaking behavior comes from the fuel tanks touching each other all the way around, and then some weird resonance behavior sets up. So the way I'm going to try to fix this is I'm going to use these radial decouplers, and I'm going to put the fuel tanks onto those, and then they're spaced out a little bit. So I'm hoping, that they're not touching, they can't shake against each other and then cause that behavior. There's something else that happens here that I was able to catch, and I didn't catch it when I was making the video, but afterwards I did, and this was actually Rice Krispie Treats pointed this out to me. He had this problem. So here's a replay of what I just did. So I used the right mouse button to rotate, but I selected the fuel tank. You can see it, the liquid fuel and the oxidizer sitting there. And then I just passed my mouse cursor over it. This is a slow motion. And I took the fuel out without realizing it. So as I switched to the second stage, and then all of a sudden, the side tanks have less fuel than the central tank. What's going on? It was a darn good thing this happened while I was recording, or I never would have figured this out. I wanted to include it just in case you ran into this problem as well. You could save yourself some frustration. So now we're back in the vehicle assembly building to pick up where we left off. By putting your mouse cursor over the radial decoupler, you can see it highlight in the staging area. And if you were to adjust it, just picking it up, putting it back on, in the staging area, it sort of ungroups the part that you picked up. I don't know why it does that, just something to note. And then also, I'm misaligning this just so you can see. If you hold on the shift while you use your mouse wheel, you can zoom in and kind of clip into the part. And you can see that it's misaligned. So then zoom back out and we can realign this properly. And then by looking down, it will give you a good perspective as to see if it's aligned or not. So clip in again, and you can see now that it's properly aligned. And where we want these is actually we want to put them in stage 2 so that they will separate with the rest of, with the central one. So just highlight both of them now and put them in stage 2. So if we put our mouse over that decoupler, that's in stage 2. We can verify it'll highlight there, and that's where we want it to decouple. This rocket is actually capable of lifting one more fuel tank on the bottom. I originally didn't do that because of the shaking problem. If I put that there, it seemed to shake. But this actually will bring up another problem. Trying to put a fuel tank in that central spot. You can't do it because the other tanks are in the way. So what the game does is it reacts to the tip of the mouse, the little pointer there. So wherever that tip is, that's where things are going to go. So what you need to do is make a little space so it's not touching a part. Engines have no problem. They can't attach to the sides of things, so you don't have to worry about them doing that. But the fuel tanks will. So what you have to do is move it to an empty space so there's nothing there, and then it will snap to the right spot. However, there's another problem, and that is getting them all to become green and attachable. That doesn't happen all the time. Usually the one you put down will become green, and then the others a lot of the time will become red. But moving the view around to different spots can most of the time fix that if you're not actually clipping into something. It is rather annoying though, and I do hope that they fix this eventually. So that pretty much wraps up this rocket. That extra fuel tank at the bottom will help out in case of emergencies. So now we'll start on the next rocket design. I've loaded the basic moon rocket again, and we'll strip it down and go from there. So we're going to do 3 fuel tanks in the first stage and the second stage. This is going to be a bigger rocket. I want to try to get 8 symmetry around the central fuel tank. Now you can't really do this because they don't fit, so I'm going to do this a combination of spacing these out. So I'm going to use the radial decoupler for symmetry there and attach fuel tanks to that, and then I'm going to use the modular girder segment. And notice that the fuel tanks are slightly below the central one. That's going to give us our nice base to stand on, so it's not protruding on the central engine once we get it down there. So I'm using the modular girder segment, and I'm aligning the tops up so that they're all 8 engines at the bottom are going to be stable, and they're not going to be leaning more on forward than the other. It will accommodate. It bends a little bit, which is sort of good and bad. Good because it'll allow a little misalignment in the base to stand on, and bad because it'll be a little bit more wobbly when it's flying. This rocket isn't as easy to fly as just the basic moon rocket, but it is bigger, it has more engines and fuel, and it can lift a bigger payload, so it will allow us to add another experiment to our lander. So this will finish off the upper stage. So now we'll get some decouplers to start making the next stage. So I should mention something about these decouplers. They have these little red arrows there, and the arrows point at the part that's actually going to separate. So one half of the decoupler will stick to a part, and whatever they're sticking to is not going to function. So you don't want them to stick to the engines. So make sure the arrows are pointing up towards the engines. That'll be the part that's going to separate and then become functional. So when I put these fuel tanks on, I make sure to rotate so that my mouse is going to be pointing to the space in between the fuel tanks so that they won't get stuck on the sides of the already existing tanks. And there we have it. So this should be our completed rocket. Now, unfortunately, we are left with the nightmare of trying to stage this thing properly. So I'm looking at stage 2 right now. So I'm pointing my mouse cursor over the parts and finding them in the staging area. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find these radial decouplers wherever they are. They're in stage 5, and we need to put them in stage 2. So we'll just click and drag those up. So the parts that we're looking for are decouplers and engines. This should wrap up stage 2. So now we need to find the decouplers and engines for stage 3. Those are going to be in the middle. So we'll zoom in and sort of, there's that central engine and it's highlighting in stage 3. That's good. Same with that decoupler, highlighting in stage 3. So now these outer engines also need to be in stage 3. So this one is in stage 6. So we're going to grab it, move it up to stage 3, and now we'll look at its corresponding decoupler. That is in stage 7. So grab that and drag it up to stage 3. So now we'll go to the next one. This one's in stage 4. So we'll drag it up to stage 3 since these are all going to go at the same time. That one's in stage 5. And drag it to stage 3. Okay, so that will be stage 3. So now on the bottom one, stage 4, are going to be all these engines. So these are in stage 5, as you can see them highlighting down there. And the central one's in stage 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the central one down to stage 5 and it disappears and becomes stage 4. And there, our staging is set up properly. And now we can focus on modifying the lander. And we're going to add one more experiment on this, but in order to do this, I need to get rid of all these 2 symmetry parts. So this used to have 4 symmetry on the bottom, and I'm going to change this now to 3 symmetry, but I'm going to stack them too high. So there is the first one, and there's the second one. Now, when I first tried to do this, this is sort of like my second attempt, I couldn't get those side things on to save my life. I kept rotating, W and S, and it didn't work. So just in case you come up with that problem, you can start by putting it sort of so that the top is hanging off, and then it goes on properly, and then you can drag it down to its normal spot. I'm actually surprised that it went on this time, so I'm sure that that's not going to be the case all the time. So there's some nose cones, and we'll put our goo containers on the side. So we want to have 6 of each of these now instead of just 4. That'll allow us to get pretty much all the spots and not need a second trip, although you would miss the second landing spot, but you'd get more science for 1 trip. So you'd be able to do 2 in space and 1 on the ground, and that's taking 2 experiments at each spot. Now notice we're going to have 3 symmetry for these parachutes and for the batteries. So this is going to give us more slowing and more charge. The antenna we're going to keep as 2 symmetry since we don't really need another antenna. So that's going to wrap it up for the lander. So there is something that I wanted to mention. We added more weight to the lander, and we added more fuel and engines to our lifter stages to get us out over to the moon easier. But we didn't add any more power to the lander itself, and that's going to hurt us a little bit from when we actually take off from the moon and try to get back to Kerbal. But it turns out it's still okay. So this is my practice flight. It's very slow getting off the launch pad. Once it gets to the second stage though, it really takes off. It did have a big problem with spinning though. Once it got close to finishing off that second stage, I couldn't keep control over the spinning. But then, of course, once the third stage starts, it's easier to control. I made it over to the moon though with a little fuel left in stage 2. So notice I'm not doing any experiments here. I'm just sort of going through the motions, making sure that I can get there and get back. It did okay though. I was able to get back with a little bit of fuel left. So here I noticed I was going to land in the dark. So I bled off all of my orbital velocity so that I would come straight down and land in the light. So that's a little extra that I didn't need to use. And notice there's a little bit of fuel left in my tank. So not as much room for error, but still there's a little room for error. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Feel free to use these designs in place of the regular moon rocket. So the next flight I was thinking about Duna, but these rockets can still be used to go to Minmus, so I'm going to start there and we'll postpone our Duna flight just a little bit longer. So I'll see you soon.